Wow. Mamish, like the second I'm about to start recording. Alright, hopefully this stampede is gonna pass. I mean, it's as if they know that, like, I'm recording Babylon Talmud. I think they're doing it lahachis. They know I'm recording Babylon Talmud. They're just doing it because they want to get on the show. They want to get on the show. At this point, the whole world knows that if you want to be on Babylon Talmud, just wait for me to start recording and just make a lot of noise and you'll get a shout out. They're being mamish so loud. Oh my gosh. Alright, people, what are you getting excited about? Alright, let's go weiter. Alright. Friends, today we're gonna, I gotta flip over the phone. Oh, wow, I'm like, deja vu. It's like the other day, I had to flip over my phone, I had to turn off the sound. Excuse me, be right back. Alright, and like I said the other day, now you have my undivided attention. Wink, wink. Alright, well, today we start the 10th parak of Masechta Nedarim, and, the 10th parak is the second to last parak of Masechta Nedarim, which is interesting because there's still like 25 pages left to come out. So like, I guess those are relatively longer parakim. But I feel like till the end of Nedarim we get to like some real stuff. I feel like for the last 2 months we've been like, if he says this or if he says that. But here we start getting, I think, into more complicated stuff about how far is Nedarim and who can be Mayfair and Nedarim or also. It's already, you got to take out your brain a little bit more, I think. Okay, here we go. So, we're going to start at the beginning of the 10th parak, Daf Samach Vav Amud Beis, all the way at the bottom. Naira hami'oirose, a betrothed Naira. A Naira, of course, is between the age of 12 and 12 and a half. So if she is engaged, if a Naira is engaged, now I think the Ran said that it applies also to a Ketana who's engaged, but not a Bulgaris who's engaged. So her father, as well as her fiance, let's say fiance. I don't know if fiance is really like a thing. Maybe it's just for a bunch of schmendricks trying to be fancy and French and everything. So I'm not even going to pretend. Fiance. So Nari Marasa Avir Vaila Mefirin Nidaria. So a Nari Marasa, her father and her fiance, they are jointly Mayfair her Nedarim. So if she makes a neder, she says pizza, no. And then, so in order for that to like become annulled, so her father and her fiance need to both be like, yo, that's preposterous. Eat pizza. Hefer av lo hefer abal. If the father was mefer, but the husband, but the fiance was not hefer abal lo hefer av, or punkt fakert. If the fiance was mefer, but the father was not, einu mufer. So then the neder is not annulled, and she can't eat pizza. And certainly, if one of them was dafka mekayim, right? I think there's two ways to be mekayim. Either you could say, all right, if you don't want to eat pizza, don't eat pizza. As long as you bring back pizza for me, right? But he says that, if you don't want to eat pizza, don't eat pizza. See what I care. That's one way to be mekayim it, I think. The other way to be mekayim is just not to say anything. She says, I ain't eating pizza, and then he's like, no, I guess that would be like mekayim it. But he's just like quiet. He's just like quiet. Lips zipped. Hears about it, don't say nothing. And then comes the end of the day, the neder becomes a thing. So, okay. So right? So then certainly if one of them was mekayim it, so then the neder goes into effect. Says the Gemara, Hanu Reisha. No. When the Mishnah had said, so the Mishnah had opened by saying that the father and the husband are made for her nedarim, and then we say, hey for av, hey for abal, hey for abab, hey for ab. And then it starts explaining. If one of them did it but not the other, if the other one did it but not the one, isn't that memele? It's the same thing as the beginning. The first thing we said, Avihu v'Alim Mefir Nedarim, that their father and fiance are made for the Nedarim, and then we say if one was made for not the other. Obviously, if they both need to be made for, so then obviously if one is made for not the other, then it's nothing. So Avihu v'Alim Mefir Nedarim, right? It says that her father and her fiance are made for her Nedarim. So memele means that they both have to do it. If one did it, not the other, it wouldn't be anything. Well, I may have thought to say what it meant is O Avia O Baila. Maybe I thought what the Mishnah is saying is that either her father or her fiance would be able to be made for the neder. Kamash Malon, that no, you need both of them. If one did it without the other, forget about it. Kamash Malon. And certainly if one of them was Mekayim, the neder, so then, right, if one of them says, okay, if you don't want to eat pizza, don't eat pizza, see what I care. So then certainly then it's the neder is going to be in effect. So frekti Gemara, so you got to skip the first 3 words. Hashta yesh lomar hefer ze belo ze velo klum. No, the Mishnah had already said that if one of them, right, if only the father was mefer, but not the husband, or punkt fakert, then it's not mufer. Kiyem echod men lomali. So why do I need to say that? And if one of them dafka was mekayim it and said, well, see what I care, certainly then it'll. Why do I even? It goes without saying that it'll go into effect, and the neder will go into effect, right? If we're saying that she says she's not going to eat pizza, and only your father is mefer, and we say, well, sorry, you need your father and your husband, so that's not enough. Well, then memele, if one of them said not just right, it's not only that, but let's say we said if the father was mefer but not the husband, it's not enough. Certainly, if the father does the opposite, if he's mekayim the neder and says, okay, you don't want to eat pizza, don't eat pizza. Certainly, then it would go into effect. So skip the next 2 words. So the instance in which it's needed for is for a case that if one of them was mefer, so the father was mefer, the neder v'kiyem echod, and then the fiance says, if you don't want to eat pizza, don't eat pizza. See what I care. But then the husband changes his mind, says, you know what? Actually, no, I want to be made for the neder. I may have thought to say, well, okay, meaning if the father was made for the neder, and then the husband says, no, if you don't want to eat pizza, don't eat pizza, see what I care. And then he says, you know what, actually, no, I want to be made for the neder. So I might think that, okay, so he undid what he did originally. Originally he said, don't eat pizza, see what I care. And then he says, you know what, I want to be mefer. So I'll say, okay, so now we have the father and the fiance being mefer. No, what it means is that we need both of them to be mefer together. That if the father is mefer the neder and the husband is mekayim it, so then even if he then says, you know what, actually I want to be mefer, it's not enough. They would have to go back nochamal and be mefer together. The father would have to be mefer, and the husband would have to be, and the fiance would have to be mefer, and that is the way that it goes down. So we said that that a Narim Arosa, both her father and her fiance are made for her Nedarim. How do we know this? Omer Rabbi, Omer Kro. Rabbi says, the pasuk says, and if, right, so the pasuk over there is talking about the Afaris Nedarim, that the father could be made for her Nedarim. And then it says, and if she gets in, well, so we want to understand this as saying that, and if she gets engaged and she makes Nedarim, so then also if she's engaged, then her husband can be made for the Nedarim. So the father's made for the Nedarim and the husband's made for the Nedarim. So we see that by Narim also, her father and her fiance are made for her Nedarim. Okay. Perfect. Gemara, wait a second. Maybe this pasuk of means if she's married, not if she's engaged. No, but by marriage we have an andra pasuk. We have a different pasuk. That if she makes a neder when she is married. So that pasuk is talking about marriage. So Memela, this pasuk is talking about engagement. Erison, ve'ema tarvayu binisua. But why don't we say both of them are talking about if she's married? Mind blowing. What a gewaldige suggestion. You want to say, if the second pasuk is talking about marriage, so Memela, the first pasuk is talking about engagement. The Gemara says, who says? I love it. The Gemara says, who says? Both of them could be talking about marriage. Ha ha. And if you're going to say, but why do I need two psukim to teach me about marriage? So it teaches that the husband is unable to be made for Nedarim that she made prior to them being married. Right? So there's two psukim by marriage. One of them is saying that the husband, when they're married, can be made for a Nedarim. The other one is saying that he can only be made for a Nedarim from the marriage, but not prior to the marriage. But the Gemara says, meh. But don't we know that Memele, that if he can be made for the Nedarim of when they're married, so it only applies to the ones from when they're married, but not from prior to that. Viba Isema, alternatively, how do I know that the first pasuk of Im Hayusia Leish, how do I know that that's talking about Erison from, it's talking about engagement? Viba Isema da Havoye Kiddushin Mashmed. That when the pasuk says V'im Hayusia Leish, so Havoye is talking about Kiddushin. It's talking about Kiddushin. Fine. It's talking about Kiddushin, which is engagement. Ema av l'chude mefer. Now, fragt the Gemara. Maybe I'll say that when they're engaged, the father alone could be mefer the Nedarim, forget about the fiance. Imkain, no way, because if so, v'asur iser beis avia lomali. Then why do I have the pasuk that says that if prior to being engaged, and she's in her father's house, and she makes a neder, her father could be mefer the neder. Hashli yishlomu b'makom orus mefer av l'chudei. The Gemara says that's a shtickle obvious. If we're going to say like our suggestion, that when she's engaged, and she's got two men in her life, her father and her fiance, and we say, right, and in a sense, you can frame it as if they're like competing in a certain sense. And nonetheless, the father on his own could be made for the Nedarim. Well then, kal v'chomer shelo b'makom arus mibaya, prior to her being engaged, when there's no fiance in the picture, obviously the father will be able to make her Nedarim. If when she's engaged and there's the father and the fiance, the father alone could be made for the Nedarim. So then Memele, prior to being engaged, when it's just the father, there is no fiance, obviously the father could be made for the Nedarim. Why do I need that pasuk of V'asur Isser B'vei Savia? So Ema Avli Bayi Arus now suggests that, well, maybe the father needs the fiance, so the father alone is unable to be made for her Nedarim. The father, right, the fiance would also have to be made for. V'aris l'chude mefer, but the fiance would be able to be made for the Nedarim on his own. He doesn't need the father. All right, let's suggest that. And if we'll say, well, then why does the pasuk say anything about the father? That if the father was mekayim the neder, so then that counts. But he's not needed to be made for the neder. But imkain v'im beis isha nadara lemay kosav. But if that's the case, that when they're engaged, the fiance could be made for the nedarim alone, well then why do I need a pasuk that says v'im beis isha nadara, that if she makes a neder when they are married, so then the husband can be made for the neder. Obviously, he can be made for the neder once they're married. If when they're engaged and there's the father is in the picture, still the fiance could be made for the nedarim alone. Shelo b'makom av, once they're married and the father is out of the picture, mibaya. Obviously, the the husband would be able to be made for the Nedarim on his own once they're married. He was even able to be made for the Nedarim on his own when they were only engaged and the father was around. So I don't need the pasuk of V'im beis isha nadara. Obviously, V'im beis isha nadara. Obviously, if they're married, the husband alone could be made for the Nedarim. Ve'ema, but maybe I'll say, in beis isha nadara lomar she'en abal mefer bekodmin. Maybe I'll say no. When they're engaged, the fiance can be made for the Nedarim alone. So if that's the case, then why do I need the pasuk of in beis isha nadar? I'll say lomar she'en abal mefer bekodmin, to say that when they're married, he could be made for the Nedarim, but not bekodmin, but not when they're engaged. I'm sorry, but not. Right, he can only be made for Nedarim that she made while they're married, but not any Nedarim that she made prior to being married. Right, so if he finds out about them once they're married, he wouldn't be able to be made for them. Umine, but then says the Gemara, but that would make our point. That would make our point. Meaning, you wanted to argue that when they're engaged, the fiance would be able to be made for the Nedarim alone, on his own. But then if that's the case, then obviously once they're married, he would be able to be made for the Nedarim on his own. So why do I need the pasuk of beis isha nadara? So to teach me that, well, he can only be made for Nedarim that she made while they were married, not from prior. But says the Gemara, but that teaches the point that when they're engaged, the fiance would be unable to be made for the Nedarim alone, because Arus Mefer Bekodmin. Because while a married husband is unable to be made for Nedarim from prior to the marriage, but when he's engaged, he is able to be made for Nedarim from prior to the engagement. But how does that make any sense? If when he's married, they're mamish married, he's unable to be made for Nedarim from prior to the marriage, how does it make any sense to say that when they're only engaged, he's able to be made for Nedarim from prior to the engagement? It must, the only way to explain it would be, well, when they're engaged, it's not him alone. He's together with the father, and Memela, the father, was already able to be made for Nedarim prior to them getting engaged, and therefore on account of him sort of being in cahoots with the father, that's why he's able to be made for Nedarim from prior to the engagement. So we see that by a Nair Marasa, you need the father and the fiance. What a geschmack limud. Friends, that was the Samach Zayin of Masechta Nedarim. Friends, we started the 10th parak of Masechta Nedarim today. We talked about Afaras Nedarim, and that by a girl who's engaged, so her father and her fiance jointly are made for her Nedarim. Now that does not apply to a Bogeris. If she's 12 and a half or older, so then this would not apply. And we learned this out from the pasuk of V'im hayu siyeh leish. We learn out that the father and the husband the fiance are able to be made for the Nedarim. Friends, that was Daf Samach Zayin of Masechta Nedarim. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.